Hey everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Season 1, Episode 1, and for this very first video, I wanted to share 3 different methods of how to extract and create a loop using motion capture data and Autodesk Motion Builder. So the first method is going to be using the story only. The second one is the traditional use of layers and poses. And the third one is a method that I call personally the 50-50. You'll understand why in a minute. All right, let's get started. So I've set up the scene in Motion Builder with one character as well as some mocap data that I have found online. I'm gonna do a separate video on where I found the rig, where I found the mocap. So I want to share some good tips when it comes to finding quality contents online when it comes to both characters and mocap. So when I start working on a scene like this, having in mind I'm gonna have to extract a loop from that content, I usually focus on 3 main things. The first one is the alignment. So I usually work from the front camera. So the first thing I do is I usually rotate my character so that it's following the positive Z-axis, which means it's always gonna work towards the camera, so towards me, right? The second thing is the position. I like my character to be centered in the scene, so I'm gonna move and translate that clip so that it starts at the 0, 0, 0 scene position. And the third thing is obviously the data itself. So I start analyzing which part of that data is going to be usable as a loop. So I observe the pose, I observe the speed, because you want the speed to be as constant as possible during a loop. So this is what we're gonna do now. So I'm gonna need to plot the data to my control rig before I can even start editing anything, right? So just go ahead and do this now, and then we'll move to the story to adjust what we want. So go ahead and create a new character track onto your story, select your character, insert the current take, and go ahead and turn the story on. So the first thing I want to do is from that camera, the front camera, make sure my character is facing me. So to do this, just click on that eye icon here that turns the like clip edition, actually the ghost of the clip, make it visible, and start rotating the clip on the y-axis so that it's almost facing you, right? And if you want to have something perfectly aligned, then you're gonna have to switch to rotation here and input a data that is gonna be a perfect axis, right? So in that case, it is gonna be -90, and then we're sure that first frame and last frame are perfectly aligned. And this is something you can confirm by, so this is the clip trajectory. So, well, the trajectory, it's actually a direct line drawn from the end position and the start position. What I'm gonna do next is the repositioning of the clip. So just switch to translation, and then right here just input 0, 0, 0, and then you'll have a character starting at the center of your scene. And then the last thing, as I've mentioned, was picking the fragment you were really interested with. So we have a lot of data to work with here. So it's just your choice to find what is best for your needs. Since we have a lot of data, I suggest we take the most out of it and create, for example, a double cycle loop, which means we're gonna have 4 steps total, right? So the first thing we're gonna do is to find a start pose, right? Because you want your loop to start at a certain frame. So of course any frame can become the first of your clip, but I suggest you always pick a passover pose, which is a pose like this, meaning you have 1 foot flat on the ground and then the second leg is passing the other one. I usually work with passovers for two reasons. The first one is because the pose is easily recognizable, which means you're not gonna struggle to find the next passover further later in the clip. And the second reason is because it's a really good pose to blend from and to, because you reduce by half the potential foot sliding since you only have one on the ground. So what I'm going to do now is to split my clip so that this frame becomes the first frame of my loop. So I'm doing this by using the razor tool, this one. So if you click on this, having your clip selected, it's just gonna split it in half. The keyboard shortcut for this is Alt-R, and then I'm gonna just scrub my animation and find the second next passover, which is here. And I'm doing the same thing. I just split my clip with Alt-R this time to make sure that these two frames are similar. And now this is the data I'm gonna work with, which means right now I don't need this one. So I'm deleting this, and I don't need that one. To avoid altering the default take you have, what I'm going to do is just create a new take here. You can copy the contents, it doesn't matter because we're gonna erase it anyway. And then you can reframe that clip to your animation. And then for the sake of having a clean scene, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag back that character so that my first frame, my first loop frame is at is zeroed out. So I'm gonna put select my first frame here, and I'm just gonna input here on a keyboard 3 times 0. And then I'm gonna be able to move that clip back to the 0 frame as well, so that we have something both zeroed out in time as well as in position and rotation, since we've made sure before that our character was following the positive Z axis. Okay, so here we are with our isolated fragment. The next thing we want to do is to start working our way towards converting this into a seamless loop. So here is how it looks to use the story to do so. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by duplicating that clip and paste it after. So go ahead and do this. Select your clip, Control C, and then move to the end of your current animation, paste it, Control V, and then reframe your take so that both clips are part of it. So right now what we've just done is we've duplicated the clip. So obviously it's repeating, which means the position also resets. Right, so the first thing we're gonna have to do is to fix this, which means that the first frame of the second clip is gonna have to match the last frame of the first one. So you have two options to do it. The first one, the most traditional one, would be to use the match tool here, but using this tool you have no way to isolate axis. So if you want, for example, to just match the Z axis, there's no way you can do it with the match option. So make sure you select your second clip, and then your ghost mode is turned on, and then drag your clip so that those two markers, which are technically, so this is the current frame of your clip, and this is the last frame of the first clip. So you just have to make them match. It's not gonna be perfect, but as much as you can. And then you can observe what you've just done by, so since we're on a passover, then the left foot is gonna be our reference point to make sure that there is no foot sliding. Obviously there's a cut in the animation because the frames do not match, but what's important here is to not have any foot sliding forward. So I think it looks great, right? So right now, if you look at your animation, what it does is you have obviously a longer loop, or longer animation, sorry, because it's not looped yet. But what you have here is a cut in the animation because the two frames do not match. And this is what we're gonna do now. So just position your, actually it doesn't matter, but I usually set my marker here, so my cursor, sorry, in between the two clips. and I'm gonna be able to start the blending operation using the story mode. So if you select your first clip here, and then you drag on, you put your mouse on the bottom handle here, your cursor is gonna change to that light cross here, and if you drag this, you're gonna actually make it so that the last frame of that clip still influences, like overlaps onto the next one. So do this for the first clip, and then do the same thing for the second clip, but that way just drag it backwards in time, which means actually it is a typical A to B blend, right? So what you've done, John, is that you smoothed out the transition between the two clips so that the actual transition happens not in one frame, but in, I have like 4 and 4, I think, so 8 in total. If you want to do this even more, to have even better results, you can select both of your clips, go into your properties, and then under fade in and out, select smooth, both for fade in and fade out interpolation. So the last thing I need to do now, since I have duplicated my clip, is to get rid of the extra data. You could stick with that long loop, it's fine, but I want to keep what I had previously planned, which was having a double cycle. So I'm just gonna find in my first clip the middle passover, and then I'll do the same thing for the second clip. I think it's gonna be this animation. I'm just gonna observe it's gonna be this one here, Alt R to cut. And if you remember, since we've duplicated this clip, then this frame and this frame are the same, right? Because they're a copy of themselves. I mean, this one is a copy of this one. So what I have to do now is just get rid of that first clip, that last clip, just select my two clips, drag them over to the 0 frame, and then reframe my current take so that just these two are taken into account. And I've just created myself a nice loop, right? So obviously, right now we have made sure that the animation here, I mean, there was no cut in the animation, but we're still gonna have to work on some things, right? So in that case, that would be the hand here. So there's a difference in position, right? During that clip, it's much more behind the body. Here it's much more exposed, and then see in a couple of frames here, it just changes. So this is something we would have to work on, as well as this left foot here having a rotation flat on the ground. So this is not something I'm gonna focus on right now because it's another topic, right? The goal was to create a loop, and we have it. So the very last thing I need to do, because right now the contents is still only part of the story, is just to plot it to my character. So you can do this now, hit animation and then plot all, plot. And right now on your control rig, you have a nice loop. Alright, so I'm back at the square where I had previously isolated the fragment I wanted to work with. My character is already facing the positive z-axis, and the first frame is set to start at the center of the scene. Right now the rest of the work is gonna happen outside of the story, so we're gonna have to plot the story contents onto our control rig, right? So hit animation, plot all, and then plot. And then you can deactivate the story and hide it. By the way, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but it seems like if you have a computer that is not that powerful, having the story visible might affect performance. So now that we have our data retargeted and plotted onto our control rig, the next step is to make sure that the start frame and the end frame, so the poses, actually match, right? So you're gonna have to pick either of them. I'll let you be the judge of telling which one is the best, I'm personally gonna take the start frame. So I'm just gonna create a pose of that start frame. So in your pose control, just do this, create a new pose here, create a layer, key your layer so that this pose doesn't get affected, and then set your cursor at the end frame, and we're gonna be able to paste that pose. But before we do this, there's a couple of things I wanted to explain regarding these parameters over here. So by default, you should have them like me. So translation and rotation should be turned on. And what it means is that Motion Builder, when you're gonna paste the pose, Motion Builder is gonna perform what they call a pose matching, which means you're gonna paste a pose using a reference point. In our case, I have selected the hips effector, but the translation and rotation are gonna be preserved, which means that if I created a pose facing forward, and then I want to paste that pose onto a frame where my character is facing backwards, for example, I would paste the pose, but my character would still be facing backwards. And then the current translation would be maintained, right? Preserved. So in our case, we want to do something slightly different than a full pose matching. We want the rotation to be preserved, and we want also the x-axis to be preserved, so that our character is not, for example, at start frame here, end frame here, right? Obviously, I'm over-exaggerating so that you can understand what I mean by this. So what we're gonna have to do is just to turn off the pose matching for rotation, as well as for the X translation component. And then if you double click on the pose to paste it, and then key it here, you can see that your start frame and end frame are the same, so the poses do match, except for the Z translation component, right? Because obviously we do want our character to keep moving forward. Awesome. So this technique is perfectly fine. It's probably the most commonly used. It is really fast, really easy to use. But in my mind, it's good only when your first frame, so first the start pose and end pose are actually similar. The moment where they start being really different because of many reasons, you're gonna have a lot more work to do in the layer to just compensate the change you're gonna automatically input when you're gonna paste a pose that is really different, right? In that specific case, I would suggest using the technique we're about to see together, which is similar but still enables us to kind of go halfway in between the extreme, which is start pose and end pose. Alright, so to explain this one, I'm actually gonna mute the layer I've been working on and create a second one, which is the one I'm gonna be working with to demonstrate how this technique works. Now it is pretty similar because we're gonna have to create a pose and then paste it, but in that case we're gonna have to do this twice, on the first frame and on the last frame. To demonstrate the power of this technique, I'm actually gonna alter one of the poses, which is gonna be this one. So, sorry, on this layer, I'm just gonna show you, I'm gonna introduce the difference. So I'm gonna key that one so that it stays the same. And over here, I'm just gonna like do some weird stuff on my character so that, you know, the pose is, it's pretty different, or more than it was. Something like this, right? It would be worse to actually use the first technique we've seen a while ago to compensate that change. So this layer here, actually this one I'm gonna delete. This one I'm just gonna rename and pose difference. And I'm gonna create a new one, which is the one I'm gonna be working on with the poses. So let me delete these poses so that we start fresh. So I'm gonna create a pose on the first frame, and as well as on the last frame. And what we're gonna have to do now is just paste the pose we've created from the first frame on the last frame, and vice versa. The parameters are gonna have to be the same as previously, so we want to keep the rotation as well as the X component of the translation. So just paste the first pose on the last frame and paste the second pose on the first frame. So right now, obviously, you still have differences, but then the trick is like, if you change the weight of your layer and set it to 50%, then magically you have a perfect match. So how it works is you reduce by half the changes you've introduced by pasting the pose. So one pose is now halfway towards the second pose, the other one, which means that if your character was, for example, on the first frame bent forward, and then our last frame was really straight, then your first frame is gonna be halfway towards the first and the last, and the same thing for your last frame, which means they meet at some point, which is the halfway point, and this point in our case is a pose, and this is the pose we get when we do this operation on the first frame and on the last frame. So it's good to have in mind that you've now altered more the animation itself by saying that if your first pose was like, let's take the example from earlier, really bent forward, slightly lower, and then a normal pose for the end pose, then your clip would be halfway towards these poses, but then you propagate the changes during your entire animation. So this is why it works really good when you have poses that are really different from start to end. And there you go, my 3 different approaches to quickly and easily create seamless loops from mocap. If there is another method that you're using yourself, please let me know in the comments. If there is something you would like me to cover or to get back to for the story, the layers, the pose controls, please let me know as well. In the meantime, thank you for watching, have fun, stay safe, and see you soon.